Welcome back from your very quick comfort break. I hope you are all enjoying the morning as much as we are. Our next speaker, in my opinion, is one of the bravest and most inspiring people you could meet. Kim is an ambassador for the Jo Cox Foundation, which was set up after the tragic murder of her sister Jo Cox back in June 2016. Since Jo's death, Kim has demonstrated incredible strength and devoted much of her time to creating a positive legacy for her sister, working tirelessly to create as much positive energy and action as she can. Through her work in Yorkshire and across the UK, Kim champions the importance of strong communities where everyone has a sense of identity and belonging, which is very much inspired by Jo's words in her first speech to Parliament when she said, "We have far more in common than that which divides us." We are truly grateful to Kim for agreeing to join us today and sharing her story. Thank you, Kim.
Oh, thank you so much, Emma, for that lovely introduction. That was really, really nice. Thank you. And it is a real pleasure and a real honour to join you all today out there, wherever you may be. It's so hard for me to do stuff like this because so much of what I do is based around interaction with people and body language and being in the same room as people, and I'm really missing that. So I'm glad to be here virtually, but it's such a shame we couldn't do this in person. So before I start my official presentation, how are you all? It's all a bit bonkers, isn't it? It's all a bit, well, more than a bit bonkers. It's totally bonkers at the minute. And my heart is with everybody working in education at the moment. I just think you're doing such an amazing job. It is so challenging. My partner teaches. I've got lots of friends who teach and, you know, work in schools in lots of other really important roles. And it's tough. And my heart is really with you. So well done for everything that you're doing. My presentation might be a little bit different in some ways from some of the others that you're going to hear today. I am speaking to you as professionals, as people who work in education, but I guess I'm also speaking to you as human beings, as mums and dads and brothers and sisters and daughters and sons. And really my focus will be on resilience, which I think is something that is clearly at the moment more important than ever. And this is resilience of children and young people, but it's also resilience of every single one of us to get through the tough times that we're going through. I'm not an expert in anything that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to tell you my story, and I'm going to tell you some of the stuff that we've done in the last few years. And I'm hopefully going to provide you with some ideas and some inspiration professionally and personally that you can take away from the session today. So let's try this technology. Let's get this screen shared from beginning. Can you see me? Is it there? Let's minimize that. Share screen, share screen. It's a whole new world. Am I there? Can you see me, guys? Yep, I'm going to crack on.
You're not. Do you want me to bring in your slides, Kim?
Oh, I should be. Hang on a second. I thought I'd got this sussed. Let's do it again. Oh, hang on. I think I've got it. The power of technology. Am I there, Graham? Give me a yes.
Yeah, you're all there. Good to go.
Brilliant, lovely. Right, let's do this then. Okay, so yes, as I have said, my name is Kim Leadbeater, and I work as an ambassador for the Jo Cox Foundation, and I also chair a volunteer group here in West Yorkshire, where I am coming to you from this morning, called More in Common Batley and Spen. And the reason I do both those things and lots of other things is because I am Jo Cox's sister. And for anybody that doesn't know, Jo was the MP for Batley and Spen, who was murdered in June 2016. And I'm very honest and very open about the fact that since that day, I know I haven't dealt with what's happened to our family. What I've done instead, rightly or wrongly, is I have got my head down and I've tried to work as hard as I can to do stuff in Jo's name that she would be incredibly proud of, and to create a really positive legacy for her by making a difference on some of the issues that she cared about and some of the issues, sadly often, that our country faces and has faced in the past few years. And that's been my way of coping. So when we talk about resilience, I'm not saying that I've got it right at all, but hopefully by doing something positive in the most difficult and horrific of circumstances, that is certainly one way of getting through. And I think that really resonates with the situation we all find ourselves in at the moment. In terms of my background, this was all very, very new to me. My background initially was in sales, and then I found my real passion, which was working in the health and fitness industry. I did my degree when I was a little bit older. I did my degree at 25, and my degree was in physical activity and health and well-being. And this is something I feel really passionately about, which again, I think really resonates with your conference today, taking a holistic approach to people's well-being, young people and adults as well. So looking, yes, physically how we're doing, but also mentally, socially, spiritually, everything encompassing the whole person, the whole child, in terms of how we are doing in terms of looking after ourselves. I then, after I did my degree, went on to be a lecturer at a couple of local colleges in Dewsbury and Bradford. So I have got some very first-hand experience of education. I really appreciate the power of education to change lives, but I also really appreciate the pressure that there is in education on your life, and it's tough. I only ever taught a maximum of 3 days a week, because that was as much as my sanity could take, and I did love it. I really loved it, but I subsidised my income by having my own business as well. So I kept going with my physical activity work. I used to teach exercise classes, lots of boxercise, circuit training, but my favourite stuff was the cheesy 80s aerobic sessions that I used to do. And a big part of those classes was about people coming together and the social contact and the interaction that it provided, not just about the physical workout. I also do one-to-one sessions working as a personal trainer. And again, that for me was really about looking at the whole person holistically, at their well-being. It's not just about doing exercises, it's about mental well-being, and I still do some personal training alongside the work that I do for the foundation. I haven't managed to go back to teaching any cheesy aerobics classes yet. I would find that too difficult, I think, partly because Jo used to come to my classes and she loved it. I remember one example very clearly when we were literally dancing around her little boy who had only just been born, but Jo was determined that she was going to come and do the workout. So we all danced around him, and he had a wonderful time as much as anybody else. I play hockey in my spare time. That's my sport. That's one of the ways that I release my energy and a lot of the stresses and tension of current times, although sadly that's now cancelled along with everything else. But I was new to the voluntary sector. New to campaigning, new to public speaking, hadn't done any of that sort of stuff before Jo was killed, and wasn't party political. And actually, I'm not party political now. I've always been very interested in politics, but we weren't a political family growing up, and that was the route that Jo took. But she took it in her own way of making a difference to people's lives. And that's where Jo and I were absolutely two peas in a pod, very people focused, very interested in people's stories and what's going on in their lives. The other links I have to education, I guess, would be that when I started doing my physical exercise classes and sessions, I went into a lot of schools delivering sessions to secondary school and primary school children, and I absolutely loved it. The buzz of seeing young people jumping around, dancing around, having a great time was hugely powerful, and I do feel passionately about the role of physical activity in young people's well-being. And I think sadly often PE and exercise is pushed to the bottom of a whole lot of other priorities. And I understand the importance of other subjects, but in terms of giving people long, healthy lives, we should never be underestimating the importance of physical activity. My dad was a school governor. My mum was a school secretary for the large part of her career. So I've always had a real affinity with education. What my situation means, I suppose, above all else, is that I've got absolutely no agenda in any of the stuff that I'm doing. And all I'm trying to do is something good from something unbelievably horrific. And I found that is a really strong position to be in. It's also quite a scary position at times. But I was really clear that I loved my life. I didn't want my life to change. I had no desire to be on the telly. I had no desire for people to know who I was. And we always used to say to Jo, we'll support you. We're really proud of you, but we want to be behind the scenes. We don't want anyone to know who we are. And Jo, in true Jo style, would say, "Oh yeah, it's fine. Your lives won't change at all. I'll just go do my thing." And as we've said on many occasions, we are where we are. And talking about Jo, a little bit more about her as a person. Jo was genuinely one of the nicest, kindest, most lovely people you could hope to meet. And I know everybody says that when people die, don't they? But she really was. She was really annoying. She was really ditzy and dizzy, and like she'd never have any money on her or the right clothes to wear. She forgot to take her bike on a cycling holiday. You know, she'd always just turn up totally unprepared because she was always looking at the bigger picture. So the minutiae of life sometimes escaped her. So she was really annoying, but she was genuinely incredibly lovely. What a lot of people also don't know is that she was actually very shy when we were children. And I always talk about this when I'm talking to young people in particular, because I think young people see people in the public eye and assume that that's what they've always been like. They've always been confident and able to stand up and speak. And Jo wasn't. When we were kids, she would always push me forward and say, "Oh, Kim, you do it. You know, you ring for the bus timetable, or you order the takeaway, or whatever it might be." So she had to work really hard to get to where she got to. We had a lovely childhood. We were blessed with two parents who loved us dearly and instilled in us a core set of values and beliefs. You know, and I'm not talking about fancy things. I'm just talking about treating people with respect, treating people how you would wish to be treated, compassion, understanding. Sadly, those values were also accompanied by dreadful matching outfits and hairdos. As you can see from the pictures there, anybody who's a similar age to me will recognise that beautiful basin cut that we've got going on there. But we had a wonderful childhood, and our parents supported us and cared for us in a truly fantastic way. But we're also blessed with a great education. And again, I think that's why I feel so strongly about the role of education. We had great primary schools, secondary school, you know, some brilliant teachers and staff working in schools who did make a big impact on our lives. So what I'll talk about now is three main things. The first is the Jo Cox Foundation, which is the organisation that we set up after Jo was killed. The second is the More in Common community, and the third is the Great Get Together. And the three of those things do interlink and interweave. I just wondered, is there any pressing questions before I go on? Anything anybody would like to just ask or comment? I'm so sad that I can't see you all. Graham, anything coming through?
Not yet, Kim, but when there are, perhaps I'll just jump in and read them out for you, if that works for you. Brilliant,
that would be good. As long as everyone's still out there and doing okay. Okay, so the Jo Cox Foundation. So the months after Jo was killed, and I have to be honest, I don't remember much about that time, but it was one of those situations where there wasn't anything anybody could do to make things any better. But one thing that people do in these situations is they donate money. And from the money that was donated, we supported 3 charities that we know Jo would have supported. So we supported the White Helmets, which is the voluntary organisation in Syria, who essentially pull people and children out of bombed buildings, and they are a voluntary ambulance service on the ground. So we supported the White Helmets with a big chunk of money. We supported the Royal Voluntary Service locally here in West Yorkshire, who work on loneliness and isolation, particularly on older people. And we supported the organisation called Hope Not Hate, who are a group who work to tackle extremism, and particularly right-wing extremism. And because of the nature of Jo's murder, we picked them. So we gave most of the money to those causes because we know that that's what Jo would have wanted. With the money that was left, we set up the foundation. And as you can possibly imagine, at that time, there was no grand plan. There was no one sitting down in a room going, right, what should we do? It was very, very organic. And initially, I guess we set out to finish some of the work that Jo had started. So looking at some of the issues that she'd started working on, and the biggest example of that, I guess, is loneliness. But there wasn't, like I say, a long-term plan for that. But over the past 4 years, we have developed into an organisation working on a variety of issues that Jo cared about, but also that the country, I think, is dealing with at the moment. In terms of our team, we're only a small team. We describe ourselves like Jo, small and mighty. And it took us, the first couple of years to come up with really what our vision and our mission were. But we've got those now. And really, we're working towards a kinder, more compassionate society where everyone has a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. And we recognise that as human beings, we've got more in common than that which divides us. And I'll come on to that expression shortly. And our mission is to galvanise positive change locally, nationally and internationally. A lot of what we do is about partnering with other organisations and individuals who share the vision that Jo had and that we had for a fairer, kinder, more compassionate world. In terms of the 3 strands to our work, I'll just talk about those briefly. Locally, this sense of building compassionate, connected communities is really important to us. And I think, a lot of this comes from when Jo was killed. There was a real sense, and so many people said this to us and said it to me since, how could something like that happen? What has happened to our country where a woman going about her business, could be killed in such a horrific way? What has happened to our country? What has happened to our communities? And sadly, there's lots of other examples of horrific things happening at a community level that lead to that question. So we're trying to build this sense of community. One of the main ways that we do that is through the Great Get Together campaign, which I'll come on to again shortly, and also by building this more in common community. So that's the very localised work, which actually then spans out nationally as well. Other things that we do at a national level: working on building a better public life, tackling abuse and intimidation. In 2016, when Jo was killed, I'm sure you'll remember, it was all around the time of the Brexit vote, and there was a real toxicity in public debate. This was about the treatment of politicians and other people in public life being horribly abused on social media, but also physically. Offices being attacked, windows being broken. But there was also, for me, a real sense of lack of decent debate amongst politicians and leaders themselves. So there was a real sense that, hang on a minute, we obviously are at a situation now where lots of people disagree on one particular issue and lots of issues, but we've lost that ability to disagree with compassion and understanding. So one of the things that we do through the foundation is try and build a more respectful dialogue. And we're doing that by devising a joint standard of conduct for all the political parties to sign up to. Because from my perspective, you can't have politicians complaining about the way that they're being treated if they are part of the problem as well. So that's one strand of work. We also encourage cross-party work on important issues. And this is really about how Jo did her job as an MP. She wasn't tribal in her politics. She'd worked in war zones and countries around the world where people had little food, little water, and sadly, often very little hope. But she cared about making a difference to people's lives. And when she came back to the UK to start a young family, that's why she went into politics. And she was happy to work on a cross-party basis to tackle the issues that mattered to people. And again, our work on loneliness is a really good example of that. Jo had started working on loneliness with Seema Kennedy, who was then a Conservative MP. And after Jo was killed, Rachel Reeves, a Labour MP, picked up that work with Seema in partnership, and they turbocharged work on loneliness to the extent where we ended up with the world's first ever government strategy on loneliness and the appointment of the world's first ever Minister for Loneliness. So by picking an issue and working on a cross-party basis, we saw how you can make real change. Now, that's clearly not always easy on some issues, but I think if you have that as your overriding approach, working with people who you may disagree with on things, that's a really important way of doing things. And we've certainly done that through the work of the foundation. We're very keen to inspire the next generation of women and young people to enter public life, even though it can be a really tough place. How can we encourage good people to want to put themselves forward? And again, we do work on that locally and nationally. An initiative that we set up at the start of lockdown was part of our national work that goes on at the moment. You'll remember back in March, there was a real sense of men in suits on the telly telling you everything that you couldn't do. And it was really quite a scary time. And as an organisation, we felt, hang on a minute, where are the voices talking about human connection? Where are the voices talking about the human impact of lockdown and the virus? And there were lots of organisations doing things, brilliant work, but we felt it needed all pulling together. So we set up an organisation called the Connection Coalition. And we set it up with the Red Cross and Mind. We got some funding from Nesta and Facebook. And through this organisation, we asked people to sign up, share resources, share good practice, share their ideas about how we could get through the months together. And now we've got 600 organisations signed up. We've done various webinars across the summer, and we're going to continue with those going forward. So this idea of human connection, and I think, again, this is something that we need to think about in education, how we keep the human bonds of connection and kindness going while we're all facing this overriding really tough situation. Internationally, there's not many of us at the foundation, so we're not in every country, but what we do is we support organisations and initiatives around the world that champion the causes that Jo believed in. And a couple of years ago, we were delighted when the Department for International Development launched the Jo Cox Memorial Grants. And these are projects that are being carried out in, I think it's 18 countries around the world in Jo's name, looking at building community where communities are at risk of breaking down, looking at women's empowerment, and we've got some amazing organisations running those projects in Jo's name. So that's kind of how we run the foundation, and we do that because essentially that reflects Jo's life. Local work, nationally, and then internationally. Jo was a Yorkshire lass, very proud of her roots, and the stuff we do here in Batley and Spen is really fundamental to the work of the foundation, but she'd also gone on to have this national role as an MP. So it's really important that we spread that work out across the whole country, and then internationally to reflect the work that she'd done for a big chunk of her life in the voluntary sector. And if you want more information about the foundation, there's loads of stuff on the website. You can go on there and have a look. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about, more in common. Jo and I were brought up here in Batley and Spen, and it's a very diverse community, probably like lots of the areas where you guys live and work in. But what Jo observed, having gone round, knocking on doors, campaigning and canvassing, is that despite those differences and despite that diversity, which she felt, as I do, should be celebrated, but if we cut through all that, we're actually far more united and have got far more in common than that which divides us. And those words have become something of a beacon of hope in difficult times in the last few years. And just to be clear, more in common isn't about either pretending that we're all the same or pretending that we agree on everything, because the world would be a very boring place if that was the case. But what it is about is acknowledging the differences, acknowledging the different viewpoints, but remembering how to connect on a human level on the things that we share. And I always quote really simple examples. You know, we all want to put food on the table for our families. We want our kids to be well looked after. We hopefully, the majority of us, want to live peacefully together. So how do we cut through the differences and acknowledge the differences in a positive way while keeping those shared bonds of humanity? And that, for me, is what More in Common is about. And I think it's a really important principle to take into education and when we're working with young people. We've had a local school who has actually developed a kind of More in Common curriculum based around that principle. And it does fit in. I'm not quite sure where we are in education now with PSHE, but it fits in with a lot of that kind of work. And we're more than happy for schools to use this sort of More in Common principle if it's helpful in any way. And it's well worth a watch of Jo's maiden speech if you've never seen it. She really does encapsulate the local area. And she talks about Fox's Biscuits, which I'm hoping lots of you have heard of. And the factory is here just in Batley. She talks about the Frontier nightclub, which some of you may even have heard of, which was Batley Variety Club back in the day, where we used to get some of the big acts coming and performing. And just that real sense of place, that real sense of community. So what is the More in Common community? Well, what happened locally after Jo was killed, which is what we often see in horrific situations, is people didn't allow themselves to be any more divided than was absolutely inevitable because of Jo's murder. People got together and said, hang on a minute, there's a real tangible sense here that this community could be torn apart by this. But they didn't let that happen. So they came together, a bunch of volunteers, some who knew Jo, some who didn't know Jo, and they formed this More in Common group. And we started doing things, events, to pull the community together. Now, what I didn't know at the time was that other groups were setting up across the country. So we had groups in Darlington, in Boston, in Lincolnshire, and in London, setting up and, really just in disbelief about what had happened to Jo and saying, hang on a minute, we're better than this. This country is better than this. Let's pull together. So what we're doing now through Jo's foundation is developing this grassroots movement, this grassroots network where we can work together across the country to build these strong and compassionate communities that I've talked about. One of the nicest More in Common stories is the group in Boston in Lincolnshire and the group in Lambeth in London. Lambeth had the highest Remain vote in the EU referendum, and Boston had the highest Leave vote in the EU referendum. And instead of viewing each other as sworn enemies who would never want to speak to each other, they actually reached out to each other and said, hang on a minute, why did this happen? How did this happen? What's going on in your community for that vote to go that way? And what's going on in your community for you guys to vote like that? And they've developed a friendship, and they visit each other. They have coach parties where they go and visit each other and understand each other's community. Sadly, obviously, that's not happening at the moment, but that will be picked up again as soon as we're able. And I guess that's what we're trying to develop with this More in Common network. How do we understand what is going on in communities different to our own, as well as understanding what's going on in our own community? And this is really about counteracting the narrative of division and negativity. Just before lockdown, I thought we were maybe getting somewhere with pulling the country back together. Sadly, the virus hit, and we saw a real positive sense of togetherness at the start of lockdown, but I think it's probably fair and realistic to say that that is fraying at the seams somewhat now, and we are seeing those divisions rising again for various different reasons. So I think the More in Common message and the More in Common community is needed more than ever. But these are just normal people who want to make a difference and do something positive. Again, not party political at all. We have people who are in our group who are Labour supporters. We have people who are not interested in party politics whatsoever. And we have people who support various other different parties. But it isn't about that. It's about coming together for the good of the community. Okay, so Batley and Spen, what do we do up here? And the reason I'm sort of telling you about this is partly to give you the overview of the foundation's work, but also this might be something that you're interested in your local area. What we've seen in lockdown is the development of so many amazing mutual aid groups, and you might be involved in one of those mutual aid groups. And what we're finding with a lot of those mutual aid groups now is, right, where do we go next? We've done so much amazing stuff in lockdown. What's our next progression to keep this sense of community together? And it might be that a More in Common group is one way of doing it. So this is what we do, like I say, at a local level. Community-based events and activities, including the Great Get Together, which I'll come on to in a second. Partnerships and networking. I feel really passionately about this. And I think, again, because of my background, so I was in the private sector, then I was in the public sector in education, and now I find myself in the voluntary sector working for Jo's charity. We're only going to make a real difference to communities and to the country if those three sectors work together. I really do believe this, because they've all got strengths and they've all got weaknesses. Public sector, one of the first meetings we had locally was sitting down in a room, and a lot of people started going on about how rubbish the council were. And there was a lot of council bashing. And I sat there for 20 minutes and I thought, right, we can either sit here and go on about how bad the council is and what they're not doing and what they should be doing. Same with the police. We could do the same thing around that. Or we can sit here and we can say, right, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to make a difference on some of the issues that the community is facing? And then what we can do is we can take those proposals to the council and work together to try and solve them. And what we can also try and do is get a few local businesses involved who might not have time, but might have some cash that they can put in. And that's what we did. And as a result of that, I'm not saying it's perfect, but we've got a really positive working relationship with the council. We've got some really positive relationship with local businesses, because we've got this shared vision about making a difference to the community. So that's the partnerships and networking side of it. And then community projects. This is the real challenge, and you've probably got this where you live. It's all very well preaching to the converted. It's all very well having events and activities where everyone's great and everyone's lovely and gets on. How do we engage people who do not naturally embrace the concept of More in Common? And it's tough. It's really tough. And we're still working on that. So at the moment, we're pulling together some discussion groups, and we started a little bit of this before lockdown, trying to get people together who've got different opinions, but look at ways that we can have important discussions around some of the issues that people care passionately about, and trying to get people to see different perspectives. And that is a real challenge, but I think it's really important work. And obviously those things are interlinked. Won't read through word for word on these, but if you want to know more about the More in Common group and how it operates and how it might work where you are, we've set some values and some aims and some objectives together there. Again, that took us ages. You know, we sat down, we had loads of meetings, because again, everything we did at the start was so organic. It was like, let's just do amazing stuff, which was brilliant, and it's exactly how Jo would have done it. But then eventually you get to a point, don't you, where you think, hang on, what's the plan? What are we actually trying to achieve here? And that's where we set out with our aims and our objectives and our values. We've got a great board locally. Education is very much at the heart of a lot of what we do. We have a head teacher on our board, and it's not an official board, it's essentially just a room full of amazing people. But we've got head teachers, we've got a local vicar, we've got a local imam, we've got people involved in various different community groups, whether it's the local choir, other people who work in education, and really people who understand the community just coming together and sharing ideas. And again, I've alluded to it there already, but I suppose one of the questions that we had to ask ourselves was, well, how are we going to do this work? What's it going to look like? So we picked 4 strands. And again, it's not rocket science, is it? Sport and physical activity for me, clearly with my background, is a really important part of what we do. When you are kicking a ball, running a race, dancing around, the differences don't matter, do they? And you see this with kids all the time. You know, doesn't matter if you're black or white, rich or poor, whatever your background is, you've got that shared vision. You've got that shared goal. You want to win, or you want to have fun, whatever it is. So sport and physical activity is important to us. Education, absolutely crucial. If we are going to work on building strong communities, it has to start with young people. And some of the best stuff we've done has been with kids. It's absolutely amazing, the stuff we've done. There's a picture on there, actually, which is from an event that we did a couple of years ago called the Big Sing. And this, again, never happened before, but we've got 7 local schools who've never done anything together. But the teachers were like, right, we're going to do this. They've got everyone together in the town centre. They've got the local music teacher from the high school, and he was in a band. So he's on the at the front of the stage singing songs. Oh, my God. And the kids loved it. And they got to meet each other. They got to meet people, kids from different backgrounds and stuff. It was really, really powerful. Now, again, this takes effort and time, which I know people in education don't have, but actually the benefits of doing that to the children and to the staff, actually, who loved it, were massive. So I think doing stuff through education is really powerful, really important. Faith and culture, again, depending on the areas where you live, you know, we've got quite a diverse community here, and it's really important to get young people and everyone to understand different faiths and cultures. So we do a lot of work around interfaith work as well. And the creative arts, which is my weakest area because I'm not remotely creative, but I've got a team who are, pick your team carefully. So they're very good with looking at crafts, singing, things like that. Again, synchronization, pulling people together with a shared activity. You know, it doesn't matter if you're knitting and nattering, you've got that shared bond. And you might end up talking about some of the more important stuff as well, but you've got that connection from the start. So those are our 4 strands of work that we do. Any questions coming in out there?
I've got a couple, if I may, Kim, linked to the More in Common kind of initiative. So if you bear with me, let me just bring them up. So
I would love to have some interaction.
Yeah, no problem at all. Here we go. Let me just read it out. So it says, I think it would be great if at Leo we could run a More in Common event, not only for Leo, but also across the wider London Borough of Sutton. And I guess really what would be great to do is pick your brains on this and share some of your ups and downs about doing this and some of the lessons learned, perhaps, from your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, perfect timing with that question. Whoever you are out there in the ether, well done. It's like I set you up. I'm going to come on to the Great Get Together, which is a real opportunity to do what you've talked about. And you're right, it's not easy. My big thing is people, and it's about finding your people. It's finding your people who are the doers. And you'll know with any group, any organisation, you've got people who turn up to meetings, which is great, but actually don't necessarily do anything. So it's finding the people who are going to be action orientated and get stuff done. That's really important. It's finding, for me, people who genuinely represent the local area and the local community. And, you know, without being too prescriptive and socially engineering things, kind of, you know, is everybody within that community represented around the table? And if they're not, let's find a way to make sure they are. So, for example, we have a large Muslim community in Batley and Spain. So it's really important to me that they are represented in the work that we do. Similarly, within the Muslim community, we have a Pakistani community and we have an Indian community. So again, we need to make sure that they're both represented. Do we have young people around the table? Or is it just old crusties like me? No, let's make sure we get some young people on board. What's the gender balance like? Are we hearing from men and women? That's really important. So I think when you're setting up that working group to do stuff, and that's one of the things I love about the More in Common group in Batley and Spen, we genuinely represent this local area. Everybody brings something different to the table. And everybody is, like I say, a doer. So that's really important. And I'll go on to the Great Get Together, which hopefully will answer a bit more of that question. Anything else, Graham, before I do that?
Let me just scroll through. I'd say a kind of unrelated question, but obviously related to what you've been talking about this morning. So do you have any advice for supporting children to be so positive following such a difficult experience?
Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? It's really challenging. I think, well, you can probably tell, hopefully you can tell, that I am a really positive person. I'm a really glass half full person. And I do think so much of that comes from my childhood. And I think that is where teachers and people in schools can make a massive difference, along with parents as well. It's got to be a two-pronged approach, hasn't it? But I think, and I know it's all a bit cheesy, isn't it? But it is focusing on what you can do and not what you can't do. And that's a big thing for me at the moment. You know, we're all in a situation now where we could sit down and write a really long list of everything that we can't do. Or we can say, right, it's going to be a bit shorter, but why don't we do a list of what we can do? Why don't we flip it? You know, and I'm annoyingly like this. I know I am. But, you know, it could be worse, couldn't it? It could be worse. So let's look at the things that we're lucky enough to have, the things that we can do, that positive spirit. And I do think part of that as well is surrounding yourself with positive individuals and positive people. That's a big part of it. But yeah, it's instilling that in children. And that is hard, but it's not impossible. Like I said, I know that's how I felt all my life. And we were lucky because we didn't really want for much when we were kids and stuff. But it doesn't have to be about having loads of money or lots of possessions, does it? It's about getting your strength from people, I think, and valuing those human connections. And that is something that we can all get, no matter what our background. Hope that answers that a little bit. And celebrating all the good stuff. When something good happens, let's make a massive deal of it. Let's just not let it go, you know, no matter how small it might be. I think that's really important as well. There might be some more ideas in this next section anyway. So I'm going to talk about the Great Get Together. Now, the Great Get Together was set up by Jo's family, us and friends. And we had the really difficult decision to make as to what we did on the anniversary of Jo's murder. And we knew that this date was coming up, and we were, you know, nervous about it, apprehensive about it. And we were really keen that people focused on Jo's life rather than on her death. And we thought, well, what better way to do that by basically having a massive party, because that's what Jo would have loved. So we worked with lots of different organisations, and we said across the weekend, it was the 16th and 17th of June then in 2017, come together in your communities, do something positive. It doesn't have to be big, it can be small, but connect with people, celebrate, whether that's using food or whether it's using sport or whether it's dancing and playing music, whatever it is, do something that brings people together. And that was essentially the premise of the Great Get Together. And in 2017, when we did it for the first time, people went bonkers for it, and it was amazing. And I think what inspired me there was the fact that there's so many good people, and sometimes all they need is a platform. Sometimes you just need something that gives people permission to do something positive and maybe be a bit silly and have real fun. And a couple of other examples on that. I mean, we see it with the Olympics, don't we? You know, you might not be the biggest fan of women's basketball or men's shot put, but when the Olympics is on, suddenly we've got this huge sense of togetherness. And that's a really good example. The other thing that we have in Yorkshire, we have the Tour de Yorkshire, which is the big cycling race through Yorkshire. And people gather on the streets, they line the streets. Now, the cyclists go past in about 10 seconds. Zoom, zoom, zoom. So it's not about the cycling for so many of those people. It is about that sense of the community coming together and sharing, and then staying out and having some drinks and having some food and chatting. So it's just providing that platform. And I think that's the reason I love the Great Get Together so much. It gives us permission to do something positive. So in 2018, we moved the Great Get Together weekend to Jo's birthday weekend. And Jo's birthday was the 22nd of June. And again, in the past few years, we've just seen it go from strength to strength with things taking place across the whole country. And it's non-prescriptive. So it can be whatever you want it to be. We've got big events. I mean, we've got a few events in London where 10, 12,000 people coming together, huge concerts on stage and, all sorts going on. But then actually it's also about maybe just getting together with your neighbour and having a chat and having a catch up. So it can be small or large. It doesn't matter what it is. I'll talk about some of the events that we do locally in a second. And again, we've got the Great Get Together website, which has got lots more information on it there. I'll come on to the Winter Get Together in a second. Just give you a brief overview, and I'm not going to go through it in loads of detail, but some of the stuff that we've done locally, and again, this might be some ideas for stuff that you can do in the future. A couple of ladies who knew Jo, knew that Jo liked running, said, right, we're going to do a run for Jo, so let's set this up. And these are all volunteers, so no one's getting paid for any of this stuff, remember, and putting hours and hours of their time in. And we organised a run around the local country park. And people just really embraced it, really loved it. We've got 1,000 people running through the woods, people from all different backgrounds. And again, we've done it every year since. And what was so good about the run this year was, okay, we couldn't do it in real life for obvious reasons, but we threw it out virtually. And we said to people, do the Run for Jo wherever you are. And we got people doing the Run for Jo in 35 different countries around the world. Thousands and thousands of people taking part. People sent us their photos, their messages, and there was still that sense of togetherness, which is really tricky at the moment, isn't it? But we encapsulated it. And what I love, again, about the way that the foundation works is we didn't cancel the Great Get Together this year. And there was a lot of talk about that. And I was like, no, hang on a minute. We're doing this. We're going to have to reframe it. We're going to have to rejig it, but we're doing it. We're not cancelling stuff. We're not going to be beaten. And I guess that goes back to what I was saying a little bit before. It's about that can-do attitude. And it's, defaulting to, okay, things have changed, but what can we do? And I think that is something that we can really try and instill in children and young people, if possible. Other things that we do locally, iftar. Now, in 2017, I did not know what an iftar was. But what I did know was that the first Great Get Together took place during Ramadan. So what that meant was anybody who is a Muslim couldn't eat anything. So I felt a bit like, hang on, this is not good. We're organising lots of events where there's a lot of cake and food involved, and half the population are not going to be able to eat anything until the sun goes down. So I found out an iftar is the meal that takes place during Ramadan when the sun goes down and Muslims break their fast. So I thought, okay, we need to be doing something around that. So we got together, we had a meeting, one of the most challenging meetings I've ever had, and we said, right, we're going to do an iftar in Batley. And there was a lot of negativity. There was a lot of, it's not going to happen. People won't come. The Muslim community won't come. The white community won't come. The women won't come. Children won't come, blah, 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 blah. And I said, right, hang on a minute. We're doing it. So let's just crack on. We catered for 250 people. We got 1,000 people turning up, queuing all through the town centre. We put food on. We had a service. We had guest speakers. We ran out of food because there were so many people there. So the guy from the local Italian restaurant was running down the stairs with a big thing of pasta, trying to feed people. And it was one of the most spiritual coming together of people that I think I've probably ever experienced. So again, it's overcoming that challenge of thinking, what could go wrong? It could all go horribly wrong. But it's kind of getting beyond that, isn't it? And thinking, look, we're going to do it anyway. And I suppose, some of that's easy for me because I've always been a bit like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And for me, the worst thing that could happen to me has happened. So I guess that creates a sense of can do on a whole new level. So the iftar was something I was particularly proud of. Similarly, we have a rugby league game that we do. We work closely with Batley Bulldogs, which is our local rugby league team, and Jo had done some work with them, so they were really keen to continue working with us. And we got some funding together. We raised some money, so we put on a free rugby match. The whole community could come along. We got some live music going. And again, the power of sport to bring people together is something I would feel really passionate. And what was so lovely about this was I got sat next to one of the imams that I had met through organising the iftar, and he came to the rugby game with us. He had no idea what was going on. He was like, are we winning? I was like, yeah, clap, clap, clap. And it just was so powerful. you know, and again, we've got more work to do on this sort of stuff. I know we have, but these stories of the last few years are just so incredibly powerful, how you can build community and build that sense of togetherness, even in the face of really tough times. Going for you guys, this is an event that we do, which I love. Now, I think I said we've got a head teacher on our board, and she's the most dynamic, amazing head teacher ever. She said, right, we're going to do something across our hub of schools. So there's 23 schools in the Batley and Birstall hub, and we invited kids from every school to come together. We meet in the town centre in Batley. They all get T-shirts made. We've got some funding from a local business to provide free T-shirts. Every school gets its own colour T-shirt. They all make banners which say more in common, and they draw pictures and stuff. And then we got a samba band to lead us in a march through the town centre up to the rugby ground. And then we get all the kids to do different activities celebrating what we've got in common. So it's anything from sport to gardening to singing to making a mural, all sorts of different stuff. And the kids get to meet children from other schools. Really, really powerful. Now, I have got a video about that, which we don't have time for today, but if anybody wants more information, I can send all this stuff through to you. Again, really powerful, and that would never have happened before locally. And again, sometimes you just got to make it happen, haven't you? And it is about, you know, finding the doers again within the local schools, and you know, we're blessed that we've got some amazing staff who really support this event. So that might be something that Leo Academy could think about replicating. And again, I'm not about creating work for teachers. You've got enough to do, as everyone has in schools. But if this ticks some boxes for some of the curriculum stuff that you need to do, then use it. That's the good thing about the Great Get Together overall. It's a platform for you to use for whatever you need to do. Of other bits and pieces, the bike ride that we do. Now, this falls outside of the Great Get Together because it was set up by a guy who never met Jo, but just wanted to do something in 2017. So he got his mates together from North Yorkshire and they cycled to London, and they called it the Jo Cox Way bike ride. I found out about it and I was like, this sounds bonkers, but brilliant. Maybe we need to do a bit more about this. I met the chap, Sir Fraz, really lovely businessman from North Yorkshire. I said, look, we'd love to do this with you through the foundation. So we work in partnership together now. Again, all volunteers organising it all. They persuaded me to do it in 2018. It was bloody horrible. No, it wasn't. It was marvellous, but it was hard, really hard. But the sense of togetherness among that group of cyclists was hugely powerful. The eldest was 72. The youngest was 14. All different backgrounds. 4.5 days, setting off here in West Yorkshire, cycling all the way down to London, where you can see us there. And we've got a really good relationship with, I can't remember the name of the area now in London where we are there. It'll come to me. And they've put on a welcoming committee for us, got the balloon arch out and everything. Really, really powerful event. And again, sadly, we couldn't do that this year. But what we did do, we said, right, we're not cancelling it. The Jo Cox Way bike ride is going to go ahead. But we were sort of having a bit of a brainstorming session. I said, right, what about trying to cycle around the world? So we set a goal of cycling around the world, which is 25,000 miles. We put it out there into the ether, into social media, and people went mad for it. Again, we smashed the target. We had people taking place in all different countries, all across the UK as well. And we got to over 30,000 miles, people on their bikes. And that was some people doing 2 miles. It was some people doing a couple of 100 miles. But it was absolutely brilliant. So again, that sense of can do. And the bike ride team are amazing. Like the meetings, like, we're not cancelling. We just need to do something different. And that approach, I think, is really, really powerful. Okay, I'm going to finish up by talking a little bit about the recent work that we've done. Because a lot of stuff I've talked about there has been the first sort of 4 years of the foundation, or the first 3.5 years of the foundation. Obviously, we all know in March everything changed. But again, the resilience aspect of this for me is really, really important. As an organisation, hopefully as an individual, we're not going to let this situation beat us. It is horrific. It is tragic. And what we felt in March was there was this huge sense of loss. And sadly, for lots of people, this was loss of loved ones who were dealing with grief and bereavement. But actually, for everybody, there was a sense of loss of connection and human contact and freedom. And lots of the things that we probably took for granted as human beings just weren't there anymore. And that's something that we felt really passionately about. And that's why we set up the organisation that I referred to earlier called the Connection Coalition. And it is a cross-sector network of organisations, charities, companies, groups who are looking at how we can keep strong relationships and build connected communities through lockdown. Sadly, as we found out at the weekend, we're going to be there again. So I think the Connection Coalition will be more important than ever. And on there, we look at, I guess there's three main things that we look at, but lots of other things as well. So we look at loneliness and isolation. And again, because of the work that we've done previously on that subject, it was a real natural fit for the Jo Cox Foundation. We look at grief and bereavement, and we look at mental health and wellbeing. So there's lots of organisations. I think we're up to over 600 organisations now signed up for the Connection Coalition, and there's a range of resources on there. We have a campaign called Community Makes Us, and again, that's part of sharing resources, doing online events and stuff, looking at what is out there for people to get help during these tough times. So that might be something that the Leo Academy would like to look at in more detail, and you can sign up for it. Anybody can sign up, basically. It's just being part of that coalition. I talked about the Great Get Together already. Again, what was amazing about this was the way that people were so positive in not letting the Great Get Together 2020, not happen. We had this is the head teacher that I talked about. This is her mum making Great Get Together face masks. This is one of our vicars down in the right hand corner there with his dog doing his own run for Jo, on his own, but being part of that shared event that we did together. We did. The picture that with the laptop on is of a community service that we put together. A couple of my team did an amazing job pulling together faith leaders from all different faiths across the whole country, and people of no faith just coming together, and we did an online service. And over 10,000 people have watched it. And again, that's something we would normally have done in the local town centre where we might have got a couple of hundred people, but that went really, really well. More run for Jo there. Me and mum and dad there with my bike when I did my little bit for the bike ride. I fell off and it was quite embarrassing, but anyway, I did a few miles. So that thing about pulling together, but also not just the online stuff, but also the big thing we focused on was those little acts of connection and neighbourliness and kindness. And we saw that, as soon as lockdown started, people again showed the best of humanity and did look out for their neighbours and did start to, reach out to make sure people were okay. We need to keep that. And the Great Get Together is a good way of doing that. Locally, I was extremely proud of my local team. We work as a community anchor, so we work with the council and we also work with lots of other voluntary organisations across the local area. So we were involved in coordinating some of that acute response work, whether it was food deliveries or prescriptions, helping to signpost people to befriending telephone services, and my team locally are still doing a lot of work on that. We've put together some resource packs that we sent out to children who were being homeschooled. Again, we got very fortunate, got some private sector funding from a local organisation. And I said, right, the food banks are doing an amazing job of looking after food for people, but what can we give to just provide a little bit more? So I got some educational resources, some paints, some crayons, puzzle books, and we reached out to families and to older people who might have been struggling. And we're doing that again next week. Actually, we've got 500 packs that we're going to send out to people across the local area. Health and wellbeing packs, we're calling them. We're also doing some work on digital inclusion, looking at how we can work with organisations to include people who are struggling with technology. And we're also set up a discussion group called Community Makes Us, which is about getting people together to talk about their experiences, because I think that's really important at the moment as well. Acknowledging, how tough things are, sharing experiences and understanding what it's like for other people, creating that sense of togetherness by those stories. Just to finish off, because I'm nearly there, you'll be pleased to know, the Great Winter Get Together. We've always done a winter version of the Great Get Together. And this year, I said straight away, this is going to be more important than ever. How are we going to keep people connected when the weather turns and, people feeling, more isolated or potentially lonely than ever? This was going on before we had the announcement at the weekend. And again, I feel doubly passionate now that we have to look at ways of keeping people connected. So we're just finalising the plans for the winter campaign. And I'd love you to all be involved in some way, shape or form. We're going to launch it officially on the 1st of December. And then it's going to run from the 14th of December to the 18th of January. So we're going to do a month. And we're not just going to focus it on Christmas. There's lots of good stuff done at Christmas, but we want to look at a little bit broader than that. So we'll start it on the 14th of December and we'll end it on the 18th of January. Because again, often people focus on Christmas, but some of the loneliest and most challenging months can be January, February, March, when that sense of festivity dies down. So happy to answer any questions on that. Would love you to all be involved. This is what you can do if you want to support the foundation. The Great Winter Get Together, the Great Get Together next June. Goodness knows where we'll be when that happens. Other ways, if you want to think about joining the Connection Coalition as an academy, if you want to set up a more in common group in your personal capacity, that's great. Collaborate with us. Any ideas that you've got, please share them with us. And I think that's just about it. Those are all our contact details. What I want to say just to finish is just keep doing what you're doing, because it's so important. And I think what's hard at the minute, and I feel this really acutely now that I'm working from home a lot, is you're not on your own. You're not on your own. There's so many people up and down the country doing amazing stuff. We've got to keep talking to each other. We've got to keep sharing how we're feeling. That's really, really important. And I mean that as adults and children. We've got to keep doing that together. But what you're doing really, really matters. And I feel so passionately about the role of education in this current crisis. And I feel so empathetic towards anybody working in education, because my worry is at the moment that you are going to become the forgotten sector, because everyone's just saying schools must stay open, schools must stay open. Well, hang on a minute, I kind of agree, but let's think about how that can be done safely and looking after everybody in every single school across the country, looking after their well-being. That mustn't be lost sight of. So thank you so much for listening. I'm so sad I can't see your faces. I hope that's been okay. And I am happy to take a few questions now, or I am joining the panel a little bit later on.
Thanks, Jo. I think if okay with you, we'll direct questions to the panel just slightly later and then answer them then, if that's okay. And I'm just going to bring in Emma just to say a few words.
Kim, thank you so much for your truly honest keynote. Your passion for bringing people together, for building communities around strength, unity and compassion is also inspiring. At Leo, we absolutely want to be part of the solution, and we strive for this in all that we do. Your keynote today fits perfectly with our commitment to building strong communities. We look forward this year to further developing several community projects that we already have up and running, including getting the Great Get Together and More in Common up and running throughout the Trust. We are particularly excited about the launch of a new project, Sutton Citizens, where we plan to work with several partners in the community to bring about change for the most vulnerable children in Sutton. Your keynote is really going to help with driving this forward, so thank you.